Okay, so welcome to Eat, Move, Think, the show about optimal wellness brought to you by Medcan.
Wow. Do it again.
Oh, I was practicing. Okay, ready?
Welcome to
Eat, Move, Think,
the show about
optimal
wellness,
brought to you by
Medcan.
Yeah, this is extremely good. Thank you.
Jazz, I see you have your poppy on.
I do. It's November. Remembrance Day is around the corner.
Remembrance Day being the day that we honor the sacrifices of our serving military members, veterans, and their families.
I remember the ceremonies, the moments of silence, just the way that we were taught about our history, even as a little kid in school. Like I remember the veterans coming to class in their uniforms and they had all their medals and badges. And I remember it all really affecting me a lot. Like it's a lot to take in when you understand what these military members have been through.
Yeah, and our host, Shaun Francis, is the founder of True Patriot Love, which on the evening of November 10 stages a gala every year, which is just a wonderful event that sees some of Canada's most prominent citizens collaborating with the business community to recognize the sacrifices made by serving military members, veterans, and their families. And typically a great band plays and there's a wonderful silent auction. And it really is, if you want to get more in touch with, the sacrifices that people are making every day in times of turbulence, which, whether you're talking about Ukraine or the situation in the Middle East, if you are listening to this kind of the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday before Remembrance Day, you can still get tickets to the gala by going to the website of True Patriot Love, and we'll put that in the links associated with the episode.
Or if you can't make it, then check out the silent auction.
Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, our host, Shaun Francis, founder of True Patriot Love, recently returned.
Yeah, he was on an expedition with the True Patriot Love team.
A couple of times a year, True Patriot Love stages these expeditions. They're wonderful events, and they tend to have adventure in them. They tend to be expeditions. So that got us thinking, why not talk about the health benefits of adventure and the kind of adventure travel that requires you to get in shape and can be arduous and can have mental and physical health benefits. So in this episode, we're getting some of the key members from that expedition together, and they're going to be talking about their experiences during it, which I think it was pretty exciting.
I think it was pretty exciting, and I think it was also pretty exhausting. I'm not sure how much sleep anyone got. I'm Jasmine Ratch.
I'm Chris Shulgin. We're the producers of Eat, Move, Think.
And in episode 190 of Eat, Move, Think, our host, Shaun Francis, gets together with 3 other men who were with him on that expedition.
Fellow True Patriot Love founder and former leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Erin O'Toole, is with us today.
True Patriot Love CEO Nick Booth is also here.
And Veteran Ryan Hawkyard. They were all up there on the mountain with Shaun, and they're all here today.
They'll be giving you a glimpse of the types of things they experienced, but most importantly, they're going to talk about the surprising health benefits that can come from taking a trip like that.
Get insight on how an experience like that could create new connections, improve your mental health, and help you discover a new passion or hobby.
All right, so let's get right into it. Here is Shaun Francis.
Hi, I'm Shaun Francis, host of the Eat, Move, Think podcast, and I'm really delighted to have the opportunity today to invite on some colleagues and participants from the most recent True Patriot Love expedition in Montana, where we recreated some of the training. But for our listeners who don't know True Patriot Love, we are the national veteran and military family charity for Canada. And I'm really happy to have our CEO, Nick Booth, joining us.
Morning, Shaun. Thanks very much for inviting me on the show today. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Erin O'Toole, one of our co-founders, who also was a most recent expedition participant.
Great to be with you, Shaun, and I'm looking forward to this podcast.
And Ryan Hawkyard, who was a veteran and a former infantryman with the Royal Canadian Regiment.
Good morning, Shaun. Thanks for having me.
So welcome, everybody. And part of the history of this is, we started True Patriot Love in 2009 officially, and it was to raise money for our veterans, which was sorely lacking in Canada at the time. We're very glad to be continuing to do what we do on a national basis. One of the interesting elements of True Patriot Love is we produce these expeditions. We got into this because more than 10 years ago, I was approached by a TV producer who was looking to film injured veterans, Canadians specifically, going to Mount Everest.
In the heart of the Canadian Rockies, 12 recovering ill and injured soldiers from the Canadian Forces are participating in a mountaineering training camp. It is the first step on a personal journey that will take them halfway around the world to the Himalayas, where in the shadow of the world's highest peak, Mount Everest, they will be pushed to their limits as they attempt to climb the 20,305-foot giant known as Island Peak.
I was interested, but didn't know what I was getting myself into. And that was our first expedition. We went to Everest Base Camp. In fact, the movie was produced and it was on CBC. It's called March to the Top. So super successful. And like our first gala dinner at True Patriot Love, it was successful. We said, hey, let's just do it again. So here we are. Nick, remind me, when was that expedition? Do you know?
2012, the first expedition. So
2012, yeah.
As I'll tell you, just the fact that they're working together as a team, this is something that they're used to doing as soldiers. When you're back from those places or you're no longer in the forces and you're a veteran, you lose a little something, right? Can I continue to serve? And so not only are they working as a team, not only are they overcoming obstacles, they're working together to serve our country again.
11 years later, we're still plodding around the mountains of the world in honor of our Canadian military members and veterans.
True Patriot Love is much professionalized, and Nick is our chief executive. Nick, maybe you could just talk to us about a bit of the history of coming on board and being introduced to the expedition program and your learnings along the way.
Thank you, Shaun. It's such an interesting model. There are a number of organizations around the world who stage expeditions with military veterans, but to my knowledge, True Patriot Love is the only one globally who does them in the way that has been built, which is in essence to bring together ill and injured members of our either serving or veteran community alongside senior civilian business leaders. And as you said, we do them ostensibly for three reasons. Firstly, they do raise money and they raise awareness of the cause and the need to support our military community. Secondly, we very much see them as a program. We know that often when military members leave the armed forces, they take with them some of the physical and psychological scars of their time in uniform. And so that journey of getting fit, challenging yourself to undertake a major expedition, being alongside others who may have had shared experiences, if you've been perhaps struggling alone, a number of those things are very positive in your longer term physical and mental health. But finally, it's also the connection between the military members and the civilian leaders. And I think too often Canadians don't see the day-to-day lives of our military members. We don't really understand what we ask our service members to do on our behalves, both in Canada and around the world, protecting our democracy and serving at the behest of the Canadian government. And it's very important that we continue to build that connection while we have an all-volunteer military, so that people really do understand not only the sacrifices that people make, but the need to support them should they end up with physical or mental challenges. My first experience of it, I came to Canada, as you can hear from my strange accent, I'm a Brit, and came to Canada in 2019. And even before I started, I had an email from the organization saying, would I be willing to go to Iqaluit and then on to Pangnatang on Baffin Island to meet a group of women expeditioners who had just completed a crossing of Baffin Island. And I had no idea where any of these places were. I sort of hit Google Earth pretty quickly. And so 3 weeks into my time in Canada, I was flying on a pretty small plane from Iqaluit, landing at Pangnatang, being greeted by the Inuit mayor, and spending a fantastic day with the local community there, and then waiting for the True Patriot Love expedition. It was our first ever all-women's trip to arrive. And then all of a sudden, across the ice came these skidoos with overly excited women veterans and civilian business leaders looking forward to their shower after 2 weeks of walking across Baffin, and then spending an extraordinary evening listening and learning from some of their experiences from the trip. And I think for me, the most powerful part of these trips is often the reflection at the end. It is the physical journey, it is the time spent together, but often it's the last evening when we have very powerful curated conversations about what the journey of recovery and the physical and mental journey that people have gone on together means for them. And we did the same in Montana, as you'll know, with the one we did recently. So they're very powerful things, and a unique model that I think has impacted and probably saved a numbers of lives over the last decade or more.
Thanks, Nick. Why don't I invite Erin O'Toole to join in? And he was instrumental in helping to start True Patriot Love. And in a pre-chat, he reminded me that he expressed some skepticism about the expedition model. And of course, now he's a graduate of one of them. So maybe, Erin, I could ask you to talk about some of that history from skepticism to believer.
I was a skeptic, Shaun. You might recall, when this came up to the board, you were approached by the filmmaker. It sounded good, but I wanted to make sure that we didn't lose sight of raising funds. And, this wasn't an adventure training for executives. I was a bit skeptical. But what's interesting, I left the board when I was elected. And by the time March to the Top was premiered in Toronto, I came as a brand new rookie MP to the event alongside TPL and the participants, the veterans who went on the trip. And I saw the power immediately on the servicemen and women, and just what an impact that journey and that adventure had on their own transition out of uniform. I saw how much the connections they made with civilians, and civilians who maybe had some success in business, but didn't understand the perspectives of military service. So you were bringing together leaders and you accomplished something incredible through grueling circumstances. And that kind of crucible challenge united a team and really allowed a lot of healing. And as Nick said, some of the facilitated discussions are ways for all participants to share potentially trauma, to share the highs and lows of their life to that point, and to bond as a group. So I went from early skeptic, Shaun, to now a huge fan. And when I announced I was leaving politics and Nick planted the seed, hey, maybe it's time for you to finally get your butt on one of these expeditions, the Devil's Brigade aspect, which I'm sure you'll talk about in a moment, was so special to me because when I was Veterans Affairs Minister, I got to go to Washington for the presentation of the Congressional Gold Medal on behalf of the U.S. Congress. I got to speak and join that ceremony representing Canada. And a real treasure from my time in public life was getting to meet dozens of the remaining First Special Service Force veterans, most of them in their early 90s. And then friendships struck up. And I would visit some in hospitals and in legions and stayed in touch with some family. For me to be able to kind of retrace the steps of that really iconic force in the mountains. I was going to say hills of Montana, but once we got there, in the mountains of Montana, it's a better description.
They're mountains.
I'm a huge fan now. And I do think that overall wellness and purpose of an expedition, whether you're summiting a mountain or summiting your own trauma and your transitional uncertainties, it's an amazing experience. And I think True Patriot Love brings that gift to dozens of Canadians each year.
Thanks, Erin. It's certainly been a journey. Why don't I invite Ryan in to give us a background around how we got connected to this?
Thanks, Shaun. I was approached in 2021 by my friend Jeremy, who was our expedition lead, actually, coincidentally on this trip. And he had said to me that, there was going to be a trip through Algonquin Park, and it was maybe something I might want to be a part of. So I applied and I got selected for it. And we did 7 days through Algonquin Park. And that's where I first met Nick. And we had an amazing time. It really was an eye-opening experience to not just be included in amongst of, people in Canada who have professionally given so much, but also to meet some and connect with other wounded service members who had been through a similar process, maybe not had served in the same capacities, but you still spoke each other's language. So to come together and, throw us into the mix with something a little challenging was, I won't say a little challenging, it was quite challenging, but, it really did help build another sense of belonging and realize that, my service wasn't just something in a vacuum. I actually did something worthwhile, and people did want to honor that, and they did want to help. So I became a fan right away. And when this trip came up, I was invited to come out and be the official photographer. And I actually have a personal connection because my grandfather was one of the original members of the 1st Special Service Force. He was a scout with the 3rd Regiment in their headquarters. He went to Montana. He did the training there, and then he went on and fought with them all across the world. And he didn't talk about his experiences. So to be able to go and, document these other warriors as they got their first taste of this, and also have a connection to it personally and get to, visit these spots where my family came through. And, my grandfather started his journey of sacrifice. He was the only one from his section to make it out of the war. And at the very last day, when we got to sit around in the circle and speak stories, as Nick said, like that part really hits it home for a lot of guys. This is what we're here for. So for me to be included in the TPL family, I'm very honored. And I think this is something that, if vets out there hear this, or other people within the business community in Canada hear this, that this is something that they should get involved with, because it is very special. And I thank you all for letting me be part of it.
Ryan, what do you think it does for vets you worry, like, is it tough enough to have an adventure, right? Some of our participants have never been in a tent.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that's normal living for our vets. But maybe can you give us some color on that?
Yeah. I mean, anything, we talked about this, like hard men doing hard things together, hard people doing hard things together, any kind of challenge, anything to get you out of your comfort zone. It doesn't matter if, you were a special forces operator for 20 years, or, you've been running a business for the last 15, going and putting you in something that's out of your norm, right? Like, especially for all of us, because we're retired. Yeah, there's some things that are mimicking things we did in service, but we're not going to recreate a gunfight just to give, business leaders a taste of it, right? But to put them in the mix and say, okay, well, we're going to go for a walk. It's going to be far, and you're going to carry your weight with you. We're going to share some stories, and you're going to have some pretty interesting weather. That adds a bit to it. And you're doing it together. Like, it's not just going, we're not just walking through the Don Valley Trail, right? We're actually going out in somewhere that's, as you said, it's mountain. We're getting up at 8,000 feet in places. So it's not just easy walk in the park. So having that ability to get out of your everyday and immerse yourself with other people and share in something that sucks a little bit, it creates a bonding experience. And I think that's beneficial for vets, because we all know that, right? That's why you share those bonds with the people you serve with. You go through some pretty crazy things together, and there's a whole gamut of experiences, but you share that together, you come out the other side, and you're stronger for it. So I think that's really special for us to be able to get to be part of.
Nick, bringing you back in, has that been your experience as somebody that was new to the expeditions?
As Ryan explained, it's a journey that everybody will experience in different ways. Most people don't regularly undertake some of the challenges that we ask them to on the expeditions. Sometimes that's because of the harsh environment you're in, as it was in Montana. Encountering 90-mile-an-hour winds whilst camping with tents was an interesting experience. I had the privilege of going on the trip to Mount Barbo, which is one of the most northerly mountains in the world, on top of Ellesmere Island. And there you're putting people, literally thousands of miles from civilization, and the sheer experience of being that far away as a group, and then having the disappointment of having to turn around because of the weather, and actually the resilience that took, both physically to turn around and come back out, having not achieved the summit, but also the strength of awareness to realize the summit was never the point. The summit is simply the reason why people perhaps sign up. And actually the point is the shared journey of recovery. And I'll never forget that evening at the end of the Barbo trip, very similar to Montana, where people were processing this big disappointment of having set their hearts on climbing the highest mountain in the Americas east of the Rockies, one of the most, as I say, remote places in the world, and not having done so, and yet still describing it as one of their most memorable experiences of their lives because of the time they'd spent together, because of the reflections that they'd shared, the physical effort of carrying all this hardware. In many ways, that brought people together in a really bonded fashion. And we see one of the nicest things about the expeditions is we see that those groups stay together long into the future. The self-titled Baffin Babes, who were the women who did the 2019 trip, still meet regularly. A number of the business leaders have helped some of the women veterans with their transitions to start up businesses. A couple have been through personal trauma since the time of the expedition, and they gel together. And in fact, at our next tribute dinner, a number of the expeditions will be putting tables together to get back together again and share memories and enjoy a night together at the tribute dinner. So it is a very bonding experience that often will create lifetime long relationships, which is very special to see and be part of.
Erin, was Montana what you were expecting?
Yeah, it was. And more, what I really hoped was that we would have, a physically challenging expedition. It certainly wasn't a hike. As Ryan said, a walk in park. It was grueling. A lot of it was over pretty uneven, rocky ground. It seemed like we were constantly going up. The weather elements were challenging. But the bivouacking and the coming together at the campsite each night, I think was perfect because, I was in the military a long time ago, but I was in the Air Force where our establishing a camp consisted of checking in at a hotel. So to have vets like Ryan and some of the guys that had served with CSOR and JTF2 come in, checking over, saying, oh, Tool, do you have your hooch up yet? That's looking pretty shaky. Can't you find some flat ground? Not only was it kind of fun, they were, giving me the gears a little bit, but a lot of them would then sort of say, hey, let me give you a hand here, this sort of stuff. And I noticed, the civvies, if you could call us that, and I'm kind of a hybrid because I did serve, really were able to be helped by the folks that had been in the field a lot. So there was really an esprit de corps. It was fun. And that's what I was really hoping to see, was the bonding element. Because I shared in my own story, it was hard for me to leave public life after almost 11 years, where even in my last few days, I was helping a veteran obtain service from Veterans Affairs. And I had this very privileged platform where I could advance things that I thought were important for the country and important to me on a personal level. And giving that up was kind of tough. But then you could see with True Patriot Love, or with anything you do, you can have that positive impact on people in a whole range of other ways. You don't need a title. You don't need the honorable and the MP and all the sort of trappings of power. It's really what you're prepared to do, who you're prepared to help, and your values. And I really got a sense that everyone around that campfire talking about their experiences understood, even though our experiences were completely different. And certainly some of the trauma that folks were talking about from Afghanistan and struggles others might have seemed to pale. There's a bonding in the shared care for one another. And that's really what I found. Is it was kind of like a boost to your morale on your own personal journey, wherever that journey is. So the total wellness of this, I think, was the real gift at the end of the expedition. And as Nick said, it's really not the summit. It's really that bonding and that opening it up, of that mutual support that you establish through the sort of band of brothers and sister from our expedition.
It really is amazing. And I think there's something to this, the preparation, but of course, being on the trail together and that, and just learning about each other. Even making camp takes a couple hours, and I find it very therapeutic. Ryan, how do you think your colleague veterans, did you get any feedback from them?
Yeah, I mean, all of them that I've spoken with had a great time. You kind of show up and you're military. You can tell guys are military just by looking at them. So there's always this thing at the beginning where you're sussing each other out and you're sharing your experiences and whatever. And, by the end of it, you could see it on their faces that they all appreciated the fact that they decided to come along during the round table. And I'm not going to go into what was said, but after people had spoken, guys would come over to you and share their personal story. There was something that resonated with them, right? So to reinforce that for yourself, like what I put out there, to have other guys come up to me and say, you know what, I felt the exact same way, and to hear other guys' stories, and then to hear them say the words that I feel about myself at times. And again, you're dealing with guys who are coming from, some of the highest levels operationally within the Canadian Armed Forces, and you hear the same words that you're struggling with about identity and about failure and about how do you move on from this kind of thing. And, you're seeing that reflection in these other people. And it's really important for us to hear that, because the rates of suicides that we have post-service are high. And I think a lot of times, if we just sit there and we're just in our own heads, that's when we start getting into these negative places. So again, to have this platform where it's kind of forced, guys might not want to share on this one, but like I didn't really want to share on my first one. But the second one, coming back to it, again, coming through with a bit more clarity on what the purpose of this expedition was, it was more comfortable for me to be in that environment. And I really think that's appreciative for all the guys. And even if they're not having the conversations in the circle on the trip, guys are still talking on the WhatsApp group. Guys are connecting with each other outside of this thing. So yeah, I think it really helps hit that home.
I think the key thing, as Ryan has articulated, is giving people that spur. And it will sometimes be an expedition. Sometimes it will be taking part in adaptive sport. So even if people don't want to do an expedition, they may want to try adaptive sailing for the first time. We just staged the first Warrior Cup last summer with the Royal Canadian Yacht Club, where we had sailors from Canada, the Netherlands, Australia, America come together and sail together. And sailing is a great sport because once you're out on the water, it doesn't actually matter whether you've got a physical or a psychological limitation. You're all out there in the fresh air and able to move freely around, Toronto Islands. We also fund creative arts programs. Ryan will know he's a pioneer of our drama program, and that can be an inspiration for people, where it's simply about getting people moving again on their journey. Very often they'll have those challenges post-service. They'll wonder what it was all for. They'll have lost friends in service, as Ryan said, either during combat or sadly to suicide post-service. Others will just be struggling alone or struggling with their families. Knowing how to move forward is often difficult. And so what we try to do is give a range of those opportunities and then work with people. And sometimes it takes more than one. There's a young woman in Toronto who we've worked with a lot over the years, and she took part in the Invictus Games in Toronto in 2017, which True Patriot Love facilitated. And having done that, she was still struggling with some of her journey. And so she then joined the 2018 second Himalayas True Patriot Love expedition. And since that time has gone on, as I say, to become a Team Rubicon volunteer. She's now a firefighter in the Toronto Fire Service. So extraordinary life of service through both professional and volunteer activities. But it took a couple of bits of just helping hand to get her to move forward. And I remember listening to her speak at one of our events when I first came here, and she deployed at 19, the same age as my daughter, and just sort of to hear her journey of being involved in an explosion, the significant physical and psychological injuries that followed that at an age when my daughter was heading off to Dalhousie University. And you know, what we ask our men and women to do is really beyond our comprehension sometimes. And yet, you know, making sure we do everything we can once they come out of service to really put their lives back together, to move forward, to be able to provide for themselves and their families. But not just economically, it's also about, as Ryan said, it's about purpose. It's about well-being. It's about why you served in the first place. People put their hand up to wear Canada's uniform because they have that commitment to the nation. They have that commitment to service to others. And that's often lost, even if they're in a well-paid civilian role. We heard, Ryan will know, we heard at the end of the Algonquin trip, one of the veterans on that trip who's doing extremely well in the private sector, and he's been out 10 years and earning, you know, quite good money now. And he talked very openly about how lonely that process had been. Even though he was doing well financially, he'd lost something when he left uniform, and it'd taken him a decade to begin to work through that process. And actually, he opened up for the very first time on the Algonquin trip 10 years after he left the armed forces. So they are very powerful things, but they're extremely important as we create those opportunities for people to move forward beyond their time in the armed forces.
Well said, Nick. Then the danger, of course, is coming off of it and not having something else to look forward to, which is something I know we need to navigate. I know you've worked hard, Nick, to create a community for our vets post-expedition.
Yeah, we've built an online collaborative space, as we call it, to allow people to stay in touch. And we've sadly lost, to our knowledge, two of the expedition alumni over the years. And in both those cases where we went back and checked, nobody had heard them from for a while. And all of a sudden, you know, we'd lost sight of where they'd gone and that they'd become more and more isolated. And so it was that spur really that encouraged us to do more to actually keep the groups together post the expeditions, which is why we've built the collaborative space. And we also now make that available to Soldier On, the government's Canadian Armed Forces department that runs the Invictus and Warrior Games teams. We're allowing them to use the collaborative space for the Invictus team, for example. So when the team came back from Dusseldorf recently, and interestingly, I was talking to the father of one of the Dusseldorf team, and I asked him how his son had been. And the dad said he hasn't unpacked yet. The game's finished on the 16th of September. He hasn't been able to unpack his bags because he's hanging on to that experience. And so it is really important that we think about not just how we construct the trips, but also what we do after them in order that people's physical recovery, their health programs, their mental wellness programs keep going. Because there can be bumps when you come back and you've still got your depressive challenges, or you're still missing, you know, one leg, or you're still struggling with post-traumatic illness. And so it won't cure everything, but it can be a catalyst to begin to get well again and begin to move forward. And I think that's really important, is that we link up with both the programs that we fund and others in the community to make sure we don't let people slip through those nets and add to that sad statistic. You know, that Canada does still have nearly twice the rate of military suicide to civilians, both men and women. You know, children in military families have more than twice the rate of mental health challenges of civilian children. And so it's very important that we provide that safety net wherever we can to make sure people understand that there's something there for them if they do begin to struggle post-service.
Yeah, I mean, if I could add something on there, it really is a journey, and your wellness journey after you serve, or even after you're exposed to trauma and still in the military, is one that will have its highs and lows. And, you know, when I was in Parliament, I did an event every year with Romeo Dallaire, named after Sam Sharp, a World War I veteran and member of Parliament who died by suicide. And Romeo himself has talked about his own journey. So after Rwanda, he was a lieutenant general ultimately, but struggled immensely and has shared his struggles. And that has allowed a lot of people to have a much more open and serious discussion about mental health and wellness. And the biggest thing I think the expeditions do, people need to know that they're not alone on the journey. And you may not have somebody beside you at every step, but you want to know that people care about you and are there for when your journey gets a little more difficult.
Erin, do you have one highlight from the Montana expedition that's seared into your in your memory?
For me, it was the final morning. I don't think anybody got any sleep. And about midway through the night, one corner of my tent blew up. And I had, fortunately, one of the guys had told me to get a bivy bag. And so I got a bivy bag just before we left Helena. And I literally just, in my sleeping bag, pulled the bivy bag over me and was just like a little cocoon for the night, because I was basically sleeping in the rain and wind. So after no sleep, fetal position for most of the night, we then get up and hike that ridge in 90-mile-an-hour winds. And that was crazy at the time, but my God, when we were done, was that not an incredible moment? So we were all tired, but we motivated each other. You know, folks were taking some video. So I think that's kind of the highlight, just that drive the body. The group got her done at 6 a.m. in the dark in hurricane force winds. People had each other's backs. It was great. So sometimes the hardest moments are the best ones.
Well said. The memory of seeing my tent blowing down. In fact, it's really collapsed on me. And I'm like, there's just no way I'm getting out of my sleeping bag to fix this. And I knew Nick was probably much worse off.
Are you telling me I couldn't put my tent up properly, Shaun? I think that's a hint that mine looked worse than yours.
Truthfully, I didn't know because I was so tucked into my sleeping bag, and literally my tent collapsed around me. And then just the thought of getting up in the rain, freezing rain, in the wind, howling to try to find you can't even call what I had a tent. It was pegs, everything was blowing away. But one of the vets came over and helped me make sure I was on time, which was, again, just that comradeship, which was just, a really special moment.
Yeah. Well, we're all in this together, right? That's part of the mission. You have to finish together, hopefully. But yeah, I had a similar feeling. I remember I didn't sleep at all. And at one point, the wind took my side of my tent up, and I did the same thing y'all did. I just pulled my baby bag over my head and said, you know what? I'm not even going to play with this right now. I'll try. I do want to highlight something that Nick said, though, about unpacking. I think that's a big thing. Like that's pretty symbolic overall of the journey past. Not being able to unpack your bags from an experience you had. Similar of not being able to unpack your service just because you've had this lifetime of dedication to something, and then you have to move away from it again. One of the reasons, Nick had alluded to before, post-service, that I've been struggling with is that sense of purpose. And we started a program called Soldiers in the Arts because telling your story is a great way to do it. And whether that's going to be through, I've been doing acting, and we put on a play last year, or painting, photography, writing it down, whatever it is. I think it's important for us as people to be able to deal with the things we do, get it out there in some way, shape, or form, because that will resonate with others, right? You will hear or you will see something and you're like, oh, that totally makes sense. That's something that I experienced myself. So I think part of the process in healing, part of this symbolic thing of, sharing your stories in the circle, and even us speaking to it like this of what we went through is all part of this journey. So again, that's one of the things that TPL has provided for us, is this platform to share this stuff. And yeah, it really hits it home for me to come full circle and have this conversation with you guys.
Any one highlight for you, Nick?
Well, I will also remember the night of a wet tarp slapping on my face for 6 hours long into the future, and the walk across that hillside in the dark and just seeing a line of head torches wobbling ahead of me, knowing that there was a steep drop on either side and a hurricane force wind blowing me and my rucksack in their general direction was pretty powerful. But for me, it was that conversation. There were a number of really powerful stories shared, but we all have our own bits of challenge in our lives. And for me, I've spent a lot of time in the last years traveling around the world on behalf of causes, particularly this one, and been away from my family a lot. And it was interesting to hear one of the most senior members of Joint Task Force 2, the really elite bit of the Canadian Armed Forces, talk about the impact on his family of having been away. We send some of our military members on 16-month deployments, on occasions, and not typically, but up to that. And just thinking about what that's like for him being away from his wife and children, and then in reverse, and not being allowed to tell them where he is. And imagine being the child or the wife or the husband, and your spouse or your loved ones are far away in a place that you don't know where they are, and you don't know what they're doing, and they're not allowed to tell you, but it's dangerous. My experience of simply sitting in hotel rooms, for nights and nights away from my children is difficult. But hearing him talk about that just helped me process that a little bit, because we all make sacrifices for things that we care about. And I'm sure Erin, through his public service, has spent many hours in airplanes and on trains and away from his wife and beautiful family. And so we all do those things, and yet we think we're doing them alone. And this allowed me to somehow make even a small comparison, and nobody's been shooting at me. No, my life wasn't in danger, but it was reinforcing for me just to sit and listen to someone I respect very much talk about that challenge for him and his family. So that'll live with me long into the future.
Thanks, Nick.
So if anyone's going to be going on an adventure, here's a tip I have from Montana and our Devil Brigade expedition is it's rely on the people on the journey with you, and not just for the difficult hikes, early morning and hurricane force winds. In life, there's going to be people on your journey that you can rely on when you're at a steep point or a difficult point, or you're being buttressed by the winds. Know that you're never alone. And I think the expedition showed me that. And hopefully your next expedition in life, you'll know there's people with you on it too.
Nick, did you want to offer?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, as I shared with my story about Mount Barbo, the summit is not the purpose. The reason why we do these trips shouldn't be about climbing something. It shouldn't be about the photo, the Instagram moment. No, I would encourage people to think about when they undertake a hike or a climb or a sail or whatever their particular expedition or physical challenge may be, to actually think about the real reasons behind what they're going to get out of it, and not just the ability to post a picture on the top with a smile and a flag, but actually how that will help move their well-being forwards, both physically and mentally.
Well said.
A tip for myself, for anyone out there really, is get out there and challenge yourself. And that goes for if you're, a veteran looking for something to do post-service, if you're a business leader looking just to get out of your own head, whatever it is. Life is too short just to play it safe. So it doesn't have to be climbing a mountain. It can be something as easy as taking a pottery class, just something that you don't think that you'd ever be something interested in. Get out and do it, because it's beneficial.
Thanks to you becoming a photographer.
Yeah, I was kind of forced into that one, but
yeah, but seemed very happy with it.
Yeah.
Thank you to our participants. It was really great to reconnect.
Shaun, I'll speak to you soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, guys. Great seeing you.
Thanks a lot for having me, and it's great to see you again.
Ryan, nice to see you. Take care.
Thanks, Ryan.
See you soon, hopefully.
That was Shaun Francis, CEO of Medcan and co-founder of True Patriot Love. He was joined by fellow True Patriot Love co-founder and the former leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Erin O'Toole, as well as True Patriot Love CEO Nick Booth and veteran Ryan Hawkyard, who is also the founder of Soldiers in the Arts.
Follow Medcan on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Medcan Livewell to learn more about future True Patriot Love expeditions and participate in the silent auction. Or if the timing is right, get a ticket to the gala.
Or sign up for the next expedition.
Go to truepatriotlove.com.
We'll post episode highlights and other links that you can visit on our website, eatmovethinkpodcast.com.
And finally, say hello and send us a tip or a suggestion by emailing us at info@eatmovethinkpodcast.com.
Eat Move Think is produced by Ghost Bureau. I am Jasmine Ratch, managing producer.
Social media and strategy support is from Chantal Gertin, Andrew Imex, Emily Bozick.
And executive producer is Christopher Shulgin.
We'll be back soon with another episode examining the latest in health and wellness.
This podcast episode is intended to provide general information about health and wellness only and is not designed or intended to constitute or be used as a substitute for medical advice, treatment, or diagnosis. You should always talk to your Medcan healthcare provider for individual medical advice, diagnosis, and treatment, including your specific health and wellness needs. This podcast is based on the information available at the time of preparation and is only accurate and current as of that date. Source information and recommendations are subject to change based on scientific evidence as it evolves over time. Medcan is not responsible for future changes or updates updates to the information and recommendations and assumes no obligation to update based on future developments. Reference to or mention of specific treatments or therapies does not constitute or imply a recommendation or endorsement. The links provided within the associated document are to assist the reader with any specific information highlighted. Any third-party links are not endorsed by Medcan.